Do you need to upgrade your brand new RV's battery straight out of the gate? Maybe. When we were picking up our very first RV ever, which was our 397TH Grand Design Momentum back in 2017, we didn't know what we didn't know, which was apparently a lot. We thought we could just go to our friend's house, park it on their driveway, they have a big property in Florida, and we could just boondock and camp and work off of the batteries. We were very, very wrong. The first thing we figured out in our newbie experience was power, because we kind of had to. When we ordered our RV, we special ordered that 397, we got it with everything that was optionable in the build checklist. Generator, 3-season doors, patio door, all that stuff. Dual pane windows. There were no lithium solar options back then, so we had the basic setup like most RVs come, which is to say we had one single flooded cell battery and a generator, but as far as off-grid, no generator, we had that one battery. Of course, nowadays you can order lithium packages. In fact, we're going to be reviewing one coming up here. But for the most part, most RVs, unless you opt for something extra, is going to come with a single flooded cell battery. It doesn't matter if you're in a 47-foot fifth wheel or a 22-foot travel trailer, you're probably going to get just the one. Of course, nowadays you can order your RV with lithium, with solar, with inverters in the works. Speaking of inverters, that was the other thing that we figured out real fast, is that when you're boondocking, not running the generator, just running off batteries in your stock RV, you've got no AC power, no microwave, no coffee maker, no TV. None of those AC appliances are going to work. So if you're getting into RVs as green as we were at the time, you might want to brush up on the power systems in an RV, how you've got an AC system and a DC system. That's not what this video is about. But if you want to kind of learn that stuff either before or maybe right after getting into RVing, the NRVTA has a really cool home study course that kind of covers the fundamentals course that I went through, and that covers all those things about DC and AC and tells you how to do some basic troubleshooting. It's a really great resource because you can go back and refer to it. This is not sponsored or anything like that. It's just something I wanted to mention. But inverters and AC and DC is not what this video is about. It's just about batteries and DC, so let's get back to that. So even though we knew we didn't have some of the conveniences like TVs and coffee makers and that, we thought we could at least still run our DC appliances off of the battery. For DC appliances, I'm talking about at that time we had an absorption fridge, which is a DC and propane mix. It uses DC power and propane. Also our furnace. Of course, the furnace is a DC and propane mix. The propane is used to actually create fire and the heat, but the DC fan, the fan that pushes all the air through the RV and cycles it, that is run off DC power. Nope. We didn't even make it through our very first night. We woke up sometime around 4 or 5 because the refrigerator was beeping and complaining that it had low power. Of course, our furnace wasn't kicking on then. When it did kick on, it would shut off. But we ran out of power the very first night and had to crank up our generator first thing in the morning to get juice back in the batteries. We knew we needed better at the time. And at that time, lithium in 2017 was still pretty expensive and not really in reach for us, at least at that time. I ended up upgrading it to golf cart batteries and wiring them in series parallel, and I was able to get enough juice from that, and that lasted us until we upgraded to lithium. I'll have links to all those videos down below if you're interested in that whole progression, but I digress again. We're not talking about inverters and golf cart batteries here. We're talking about lithium, so let's get back on track. If you've watched our channel at all, you know that I love to do experiments. So when Todd from the NRVTA, who also started his Big Beard battery company, sent us one of his Big Beard batteries to try out, I wanted to do something with it, but I didn't know what. Our 410, the RV I'm in now, already has a power system, and I can't really compare that. But if you follow us, you might also know that sometimes Grand Design gives us RVs to try out and test and give them feedback on from an actual camper's perspective. Last winter, we had their 28RL, and I did a little testing on that. And most recently, we had their Grand Design Sarah Nova, which is a tiny 20-foot travel trailer that we traveled in for a bit. So if you're curious how that whole thing went, going from this giant RV to that little 20-footer, be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified when those videos come out. Both of those RVs came with the same simple 100 amp hour flooded cell battery, so I got to do some testing on two very different RVs. Now, before we jump into the tests and crunch numbers and stuff, let's talk a little bit about our test subjects. What are we actually talking about here? The stock battery that came with both of these RVs was a 105 amp hour deep cycle flooded cell battery. Now, I'm doing air quotes for deep cycle because to me that term doesn't really, makes it sound like you can really discharge it deeply. But you can't. The deep cycle really refers to the fact that it's designed for a long-term draw versus a super fast high amp draw like starting a car. So it's different than a car battery a little bit. Still the same chemistry. I'm not really sure what's different between the two. I'm sure you might be able to run a car battery. But anyway, I digress. The term deep cycle doesn't really mean you can cycle it deep. In fact, you're limited to 50% if you want to preserve the longevity of that battery. That's the biggest downside of flooded cell, is that even though it's 100 or 105 amp hours, you're not going to be able to use that 100 amp hours. You're stuck to 50%. The other thing is you have to maintain these batteries. The chemistry in these, when it charges and discharges, some of the electrolyte evaporates and you have to fill those cells back up with distilled water and maintain those. The other drawback of flooded cell is that they off-gas. They actually create hydrogen, which is why when you typically get one of those batteries in an RV like this, it's in a little case and has a hose going to a vent. That's so that hydrogen gas doesn't just go inside the RV because, as you might have seen from the Hindenburg, hydrogen is extremely flammable. So these do have to be properly sealed and vented. The lithium battery that we're testing, as I mentioned in the beginning, is a Big Beard battery. It is a 280 amp hour battery. Now they don't even sell this battery anymore. Like I mentioned, I got it over a year ago. Right now they have essentially the same battery, but it's 300 amp hours, but I have the 280. Now, lithium has none of those drawbacks that I talked about with the flooded cell. You don't have to maintain it. You don't have to seal and vent it or any of that stuff. And you can discharge them to 90% on the reg. You can actually, just like the flooded cell, you can go down below that, even down to 0 without too much damage, but that does decrease the number of cycles that you can have. Now, cycles is the other big difference in lithium versus flooded cell. And what I mean by cycle is a charge and discharge cycle. Now, a typical flooded cell is going to have between 300 and 500 cycles under its belt if it's properly maintained and you keep it above 50%, not discharging below that. Whereas lithium generally have between 3,000 to 5,000, 10 times more cycles on a lithium battery than you're going to get out of a flooded cell. So they're going to last you a lot longer. Both of them have the issue that if you discharge them too much, you will decrease that number of cycles, but you're decreasing 3 to 5,000 versus decreasing 3 to 500, totally different story. We really are comparing apples and orangutans here. It's not even as close as apples and oranges, because we're talking about a huge price difference here also. Your typical flooded cell that I'm talking about here is usually about $100. The 280 amp hour or the 300 amp hour that's offered currently by Big Beard is $2,000. So there is a huge price difference. You don't have to maybe need a 300 amp hour battery. We're going to talk about at the end how you can size it to you. But lithium is obviously much more expensive. So those are the batteries. Now, in all of my testing, you're going to see me using a little app, and I'm using a Victron Smart Shunt. This is the same shunt that I had in our 397. And what the heck is a shunt? Well, a shunt is the only true way to monitor everything going in and out of your battery or battery bank. It sits on the negative post of your battery or battery bank, basically isolating all current has to go through this shunt. And the shunt is like a little traffic hub. It can watch the power going in, power going out. So when you properly configure this to your battery, it knows exactly how much you've used and exactly how much you've got left. Whereas other methods, like your control panel over here, maybe your little one control or your smart connect or other things that use voltage to test, are not very reliable. Number one is, it's just not as accurate as watching all the current going in and out. Number two, measuring a battery by its voltage or determining its state of charge by its voltage Can be done, but you've got to have everything disconnected from the battery and really know what you're starting with. And with lead acid batteries, they have a whole process with like a hygrometer and doing some gravity thing. I don't even know. My point here is that the only way to truly know is with a shunt. Voltage can be very irregular. In fact, as soon as you turn something on and start using that voltage, it drops. So it's never going to be accurate. So let's get to the tests. Now, for these tests, I'm not going to bore you with all the hourly check-ins and all that stuff, even though I recorded all that. I don't know even why I do that. But I do want to show you some of the highlights. Now, for this first test, it's last winter. It's in the Reflection 28RL, and my test load is basically just some lights and the furnace. It's calculating that we have, at our current load, which is really nothing, we're looking at about 5 amps or 66 watts, which is really just these lights. We've got about 10 hours. Not much when we're talking about just lights. You're going to see when we turn on the heater, obviously that's going to draw quite a bit. We're showing 46% now. Again, the furnace has barely been running. Its time remaining, 6 minutes. That's 6 minutes until we get down to that 45% mark. So we lasted almost 6 hours. 83% at the 6 hour mark. I don't think we even made it to the 6 hour mark with the other battery. So yeah, 34, coming up on 34 hours. Whereas I think the other battery lasted like 4 hours. Anyway, I'm going to call it done. So you can see that in that first test on the 28RL, the flooded cell battery only lasted about 6 hours before we were down to 45%, which is of course where we want to cut it off. Now again, I could have run it longer, but I would have drained it below the 50% and shortened the number of cycles that it could do over its lifetime. And that's exactly where we were on our first night in our 397. I'm sure we drove that thing down below the 50%, whereas testing the lithium battery, we were down to 14% after about 34 hours. Could have gone a couple more hours, so we're going to call that about 36. So here we're talking about 36 hours versus 6 hours. Obviously, the 36 hours is a lot better. Now, my test later on that year, actually this summer with that Serenova, this was a totally different ballgame, simply because the Serenova, while it still had the same battery, it had an inverter installed, and oddly enough, that inverter was wired to the AC. Again, this was a prototype, so it was probably wired differently than it is beginning to be in production. In my opinion, it makes more sense to wire the microwave and some of the kitchen outlets versus the AC, because honestly, who really is going to run an AC off of a single flooded cell battery? But it did allow me to test under a much higher load, which of course made everything go much faster. I'm drawing about 14 amps of current, which is about 180 watts. I can hear the compressor for the fridge running, so that is probably the majority of that. I'm not going to mess with the fridge because it would have to be on and cycle on and off anyway, so that's just going to be kind of part of the baseline. But I'm currently drawing 180 watts. It says even just running the fridge, yikes, I've only got 3 hours left. So I'm going to try kicking on the AC and see if it even works at all. Ooh, it came on. Let's see how much power we're drawing on this little lead acid battery. So this lead acid battery is running the AC. We're drawing 1,300 watts. And my time remaining is dropping. Oh, compressor turned off, stopped beeping. I had 1 minute left. Interestingly, this says it's fair, which, you know, again, that's why these things that measure and show you battery status based on voltages, which is what these are, they're just not accurate. All right, AC just kicked on, as you can hear. Currently drawing about 90 amps from the battery, or 1146 watts. So we're at 30% at the 8 hour mark. That is pretty good. I think we will definitely last for an overnight stay. Running the heat pump, running the AC, not a problem. But I'm going to end this test here at 8 hours. I could probably go another couple hours at least. So with that heavy load test, a whopping 30 minutes with the AC running. And again, it's a ridiculous experiment. No one's really going to think they can run their AC off of that single battery, but it allows me to kind of do a heavy load test. The whole point is just to do a comparison. And that comparison on the lithium side was, again, totally different. You can see that at 8 hours, I still had 30% left, and I cut it short because I had to travel the next day. But I did the math, and I could have run for 10 hours. So again, 10 hours versus 30 minutes, 6 hours versus 36 hours. Huge difference in both of those tests, obviously. I mean, surprise, the $2,000 battery did better than the $100 battery. Shocker. But again, the idea here is just to kind of give you a baseline and test. You don't necessarily need a 300 amp hour battery, or do you? Let's get into that a little bit. Do you need that 300 amp hour, $2,000 battery, or can you do with one a little bit less than that? We're going to get into that, but it's going to depend on how you want to boondock and what you want to run. If you are just going to go from full hookup to full hookup to full hookup and just need battery to run your fridge while you're driving down the road, you're probably completely fine with that lead acid battery. Just keep an eye on it, maintain it. I would put a shunt on it. I would recommend that shunt for any system, whether you've got a single battery or a bank of batteries, because it gives you the insight to know exactly what you're dealing with and exactly how much power you have if you do decide to camp overnight with just battery. But if you do want to do some overnights and be able to camp comfortably and have your furnace and things like that, you just kind of need to make a tally of what you want to run and how long you're going to run it. So for this example, I'm going to just assume we're talking about a 16 hours of boondocking. You know, you set up camp, you sleep, you wake up, you have coffee. Generally, we're talking about maybe 8 hours not sleeping and 8 hours sleeping. I don't know how you guys do it, but that's kind of how we do. But start thinking about what you want to run. Make a list, put it on a spreadsheet, and then start doing some research on your appliances. Generally, you can take a picture of your model number, plug that model number into Google. If you have the manual, it's even better. And you want to look for how many watts or how many amps that device uses. Now we're going to be dealing with amps, and in fact, the refrigerator that we tested in the Serenova, I think it was rated at 11 amps. So if you want to run that refrigerator for an hour, that's an 11 amps over the course of 1 hour. That is 11 amp hours. But your fridge doesn't run all the time, so you have to factor in the duty cycle. Usually that will be published also. Sometimes you can Google it. I looked up that fridge and it was a 35% on average duty cycle. Now, the duty cycle of any of these appliances that I'm going to talk about, the furnace, the fridge, there are environmental concerns also. Not meaning you're going to hurt the environment. I'm talking about the environment is going to affect how that system runs. If it's super, super cold out, your furnace is going to have a higher duty cycle. It's going to have to run more often. Vice versa, if it's lower, same thing with your fridge. But this will give you a general idea. So that 35% duty cycle of that 11 amp hours brings us to about 3.85 amp hours per hour. We're going to round up to 4 because I would rather err on the side of caution. So you take that 35% duty cycle on that 11, you get to roughly 4 amp hours per hour. You multiply that 4 amp hours per hour times 16 hours, and you're talking about 64 amp hours to run your fridge for 16 hours. You can see that we're already overcoming our minimum charge or depth of discharge for a flooded cell. So let's talk about the furnace. The furnace is rated at about 5.1 amps, and it's rated at 30 to 50% duty cycle, so we're going to say 40 and just cut it in the middle. So 40% of that 5.1 is roughly 2 amp hours per hour, and figure we're going to also want to run that for 16 hours, and that brings us to 32 amp hours. So we got 64 for the fridge, 32 for the furnace. Your lights are usually going to run about 150 watts. Again, it's going to be different for every RV, but if we calculate 150 watts, here's where we have to take Watt's law into consideration and convert it back to amp hours, so we know all you got to do for that is take your watts, divide it by your volts, and come up with your number. So let's just keep it simple, and we'll say 120 watts. Divide that by your 12 volts, and you've got 10 amps. So we need 10 amps per hour, 10 amp hours per hour to run our lights. Multiply that times 8, because hopefully we're turning the lights off when we sleep. And now we're talking about 80 amp hours just for the lights. So you can see in this hypothetical, we're talking about 80 plus 64 plus 32, I believe that's 176 amp hours that we're going to need for our typical overnight in this scenario. So again, that's what you want to think about when you're shopping for batteries. You know, in this particular instance, you're going to probably want about a 200 amp hour battery minimum. And again, this is for that specific scenario. You can reduce your duty cycles by turning your furnace down, maybe not opening your fridge as much. You can mitigate some of these, but you're not going to get down that much. You're still probably going to be well over your 100 amp hours, definitely well over the 50 amp hours of depth of discharge that you can get out of that flooded cell. So if you want to do really any kind of boondocking, unless you're just, going to like camp and shut everything off and bundle up and not use any energy, if you want to camp comfortably, you're probably going to need some sort of upgrade to your battery. Okay, so now you've calculated you need a 200 amp hour battery, maybe you want a 300 just to be safe, give some extra time, extra days or whatever. Which battery do you choose? That is a very good question, one to which I just don't really have a complete answer. If you watch us, you know that we only recommend things that we use and have tested, or it can at least test to a certain degree so we can recommend it. We used our Battle-Born batteries for years and they were awesome. We still always recommend Battle-Born batteries. They're kind of the OG of the RV lithium space and they've been around for a long time, have a good track record. This Big Beard battery I tested worked really well. I wasn't able to test it in a large bank or a heavy load environment on a large RV, but it did very well in all of my testing. It's got onboard heating. It has a active balance BMS, meaning it's always balancing the cells, which is really cool. And I like that it has a power switch on top and it has a metal case. If you watch Jared from All About RVs, he's actually using the Big Beard batteries in his setup, and I contacted him since that video, and he does still like them. They're still working very well for him. So those are really my only two recommendations at this point. Again, with a heavier emphasis on the fact that we've used Battle-Born for a lot longer than we've tested the Big Beard, but they both seem like great batteries. But if you're doing some shopping and you're doing a little research, some things to look for. Number one is a BMS. BMS stands for Battery Management System. And that's the thing that sits inside the battery and is kind of like a little brain and monitors the cells and keeps them balanced. Now, again, some of them do active, some do passive. I'm not super familiar. It seems like the active is a lot better way to go, but is it necessary? I don't know. The other thing you might want to look for is heating. These lithium batteries don't do well below freezing. So the one I would recommend is one that has internal heating to it and does so automatically via that BMS. Also, be sure to compare the warranties. A lot of times if you just see the splash page that says 11-year warranty or 10-year warranty or whatever, do a little digging, dig a little deeper into that warranty and actually read it. I've seen some that say 11 years, but really after the first 2, they're not going to do any exchanges or really do much to fix it. So what's the point? So do some looking into that. And of course, always check customer reviews on Google, on their website. I mean, a company's website that has reviews on it, I'm always a bit skeptical of because, again, they control those reviews. But if you go to Google or something like that, then you can have a little more assurance that it's unbiased. I will also have some links to some great resources down below. I mentioned Jared, and he's been using the Big Beard batteries for a while. He has also put together a battery buying guide that I will link. I trust his judgment and him on that, so I will link that down below. Also, Will Prowse, if you've never seen his videos, he is big into the solar and stuff like that, not so much in RVs, but in houses. He does a lot of battery reviews where he actually does a breakdown. He tears the battery apart, looks inside, looks at how it's built, looks at the components inside. So I really trust his reviews also. If he says a battery is good, it's good. Another great place to check is down in the comments on this video. A lot of people comment on stuff like this and have some great feedback. So be sure to check down there. If you have any questions for me, put them down there. Now, I try to answer most of the questions that come in on a video. Generally, I do that for a day or two after the video comes out, and then I just don't have time to keep watching the comments on old videos. But another great way to get a hold of me is through our Insider program. I'm on our Insider Discord pretty much daily, chatting back and forth with like-minded RVers. If you want to join in on that chat with both myself and the other like-minded RVers, be sure to check the link down below. I will have more information on that. We hope to see you in there, and if we don't, then we will see you back here in this channel next week.